Hi, folks. Having covered both Plato and Aristotle as being representative of the Greek civilization, and along with whom we've covered representatives of Roman civilization as being presented or represented in Horace and Longinus. Today, we are going to deal with both Sidney of the Renaissance and the Dryden of the Restoration. Both figures, I suppose, and I hope that this supposition is not going to be rendered presbyterous, that you have already been exposed to some ideas or to some poems by these two major English poets in your early years of your BA study. Definitely, we are going to deal with Sidney as a poetic critic, with the intention of trying to single out those ideas that nominate him to be the best representative and the serious one of the true English criticism, literary criticism, and theory. He was famous for two works, or actually for his work, An Apology for Poetry. The stances towards poetry is usually divided in two types: those who stand for poetry and those who stand against poetry. As to the latter, they begin with Catullus, going through Thomas Love Peacock, and so on and so forth, while on the other hand, we've got the defenders of poetry, so to speak, as being represented by Sidney in his Apology for Poetry and Shelley in his A Defense of Poetry. So there is some sort of a demarcating line between these two camps as far as poetry is concerned. His work, An Apology for Poetry, published 1595, originally Defense of Poesy. And poesy is an umbrella term that includes all types of arts. But to be more specific, it has been rendered into an apology for poetry. To have an idea about it is the definitive formulation of Renaissance literary theory and the first influential piece of literary criticism in English history. With Sidney begins the English tradition and history of literary criticism. By the way, tradition is so problematic a concept, so much so the case that even T.S. Eliot has devoted an exclusive essay to the term tradition, which is called The Tradition and the Individual Talent. And for those who are interested in having an idea about the essay, they can seek it in a book under the title English Critical Text, edited by D.J. Enright and Ernest de Chicara in 1966. So the real beginning of both literary criticism and literary theory begins with Sidney. Now you can gauge the significance and the cruciality of his own position as far as the development of literary criticism and theory alike. As evidence in Apology for Poetry, Sidney is eclectic. Let us look at the term eclectic. Quite often, to be eclectic carries a pejorative sense. We should not be eclectic. Why? Because no matter how much you are able to blend all what you borrow from others into a single pot, there will be a point of tension. And epistemologically, this is not workable. So we have eclectic, elective, and after all, a pluralist. Try to tell the differences between these three terms. As far as Sidney is concerned, he is quite eclectic. And this involves borrowing and often amending the theories of Plato, Aristotle, Horace, and a few of his contemporary Italian critics. He begins his criticism by quoting from Aristotle. Poesy, therefore, is an art of imitation. So the linking line between Plato, Aristotle, and Sidney is the concept of imitation. And you remember, we have already covered all the ramifications, latent or inherent, in the term imitation or mimesis. As an art of imitation, for so Aristotle termeth it in his word mimesis, that is to say, representing, counterfeiting, or figuring forth. There is a novel by Andra Jade called Counterfeiters. يزيف أو مزيف النقود. 8 words later, he adds a Horatian note. Horatian is an adjective derived from Horace. Horatian note declaring Poesy's chief end to be to teach and delight. Interestingly enough, most of classical Arabic philosophers meet on the idea that poetry teaches and delights. That is to say, representing, counterfeiting, or figuring forth. 8 words later, he adds a Horatian note declaring Poesy's chief end to teach and to delight. Like Aristotle, Sidney values poetry over history. You remember the comparison or the contrast that Aristotle has already set up as far as history and poetry. Likewise, Sidney takes up the same idea whereby he privileges poetry over history, law, and philosophy. And he takes Aristotle's idea one step further in declaring that poetry, above all other arts and sciences, embodies the truth. There is a famous dictum by Sidney himself that poetry confirms nothing. Thereby, the poet does not lie. He never lies, in his own words. For poetry alone, he declares, is a teacher of virtue. So Sidney, as a critic, is a morally oriented, a critic like other moralists, moving the mind and the spirit to both teach and desire to be taught. And the poet is the most persuasive advocate of virtue. So Sidney's morality lies in the idea, or in his position, that the poet is a persuasive advocate of virtue. He is a teacher of virtue. None other exposes vice so effectively. So the job or the function of the poet, according to Sidney, is that he exposes vice. Thereby, he is fully adulated or praised as being an advocator of virtue. Such dictum may bring to mind another dictum by Shelley. Poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. Throughout An Apology for Poetry, Sidney stalwartly defends, that is to say, strongly or staunchly, if you couldn't have an easy access to the word, I'm giving you the meaning. Defends poetry against those who would view it as a mindless or immoral activity. The accusation that has already been leveled at poetry as being immoral has been refuted by Sidney, with the idea that the poet is an advocate, a staunch advocate of truth. Hence, he valorizes morality in poetry. And above all, Sidney could be considered as one of the moral poet critics. That is to say, he is not only a poet, but also a literary critic. A label that resonates, you see, again, with another poet, another English poet by the name of T.S. Eliot. He is also a poet critic. So is the case with John Dryden, another poet and another critic and another English translator, whom we are going to have some ideas about him in a few minutes' time. As a mindless or immoral activity, for Sidney, creative poetry is akin to religion. So when there is a decline in religion, poetry can take the place. An idea that is going to be taken up and fully elaborated upon by Matthew Arnold, the famous Victorian critic. And this is typically true of Arnold and his poem Dover Beach. Let us be true to one another. The sea of faith which used to well up is now receding, leaving shingles. These are some of the lines that are written by Arnold in his poem Dover Beach. So poetry has got the potentiality or the capacity to take the place of religion when there is a recession in the religious ethos among people. And you can recognize how far significant poetry is, according both to Sidney and to Matthew Arnold, is akin to religion. Why? For both guide and achieve their purpose by stirring the emotions of the reader. That is to say, the capacity of poetry to trigger off, to unleash the emotions of readers is a function that likewise religion can do. The emotionality, you see, that is triggered or sparked off by poetry, blends truth with symbolism, delighting every sense of the faculty of the whole being. Blends, so the poetry can have the capacity of blending both the truth with symbolism. By the way, linguistically speaking, ever since the time of Ferdinand de Saussure, people got to know the differences between an indexical sign, an iconic sign, and a symbolic sign. 1913, and you know, symbolism is an inherent or native to the very constitution and the structure of the human being. That's why the human being is sometimes labeled as being homo symbolicus. That is to say, he is born to create symbols or to make symbols. And you know, symbolism has tended to be a very significant literary trend or movement with symbolist poetry. Lafont in France, who has influenced, you see, T.S. Eliot. The yellow fog that rubs its tail on the window panes. Okay, and so many other lines that for those who are familiar with T.S. Eliot's poetry. I don't like to elaborate upon symbolism because you can check the term and what it stands for. Who are the representative of symbolism in poetry, both in English and the French. And interestingly enough, you see Baudelaire, the famous French poet, has spent 15 years of his life translating Edgar Allan Poe into French, thereby symbolism, you see, has come about. And this is a very good example to learn as far as dedication in science or in every field. Without dedication, without passion, you cannot achieve or accomplish what you are after. The poet Sidney not only affirms morality, but by engaging the reader's emotions, blends the truth with symbolism. What is significant, or in other words, what stands out is the position that the reader occupies in Sidney's way of thinking. He is giving, or he is paying attention to the role that a reader plays in the process of poetry, particularly when poetry is considered as a way of communication. The poem as a vehicle of communication. So there should be a role for the reader to play. And I don't like to elaborate on the types of readers in the criticism. Who are the theorists who are mainly preoccupied with the reader and his role? And this definitely takes a lot of time to speak about. There will be, we hope, a time that we will allot a space, however narrow it might be, to this significant figure, that is the reader. By the essay's end, a passionate and somewhat platonically inspired poet places a curse on all those who do not love poetry. In other words, those who do not love poetry, according to Sidney, are cursed. They are under the curse. So love of poetry is very significant. It is the area that triggers off the reader's emotions. So is the case with religion. Again, religion can spark off the emotions, you see, of the devotees. Thus, doing your name shall flourish. Okay. Sidney concludes, I conjure you all, no more to scorn the sacred mysteries of poetry. Sacred mysteries of poetry. You see, Sidney here is speaking about poetry in a very mystic terms. بتعابير صوفية. بتعابير صوفية. Sacred mysteries of poetry. In other words, poetry, according to Sidney, has got its own sanctity. It's not possible to violate or to trespass or to encroach upon. Otherwise, you will be critically a heretic. Thus doing, that is to say, keeping the sanctity or sustaining the mysteries of poetry, your name shall flourish in the printer's shops. That is to say, you can achieve your fame and publicity among readers. You shall dwell upon superlatives. You shall dwell upon superlatives. That is to say, you will be the grandest, the greatest, and so on and so forth. By the way, and this is an interesting remark that I'd like to draw your attention to. In the 7 pillars of wisdom, there is a statement which reads, the Arabs have inhabited the superlatives by their own choice. ونحن يعني كثيرا ما نؤاخذ أننا أسرى صيغ التفضيل، أسرى صيغ التفضيل، وهذا هذه العبارة وردت في أعمدة الحكمة السبع، ويمكن أن يبنى عليها أننا متطرفون في خلع المديح على الآخرين. And this idea has already been taken up. You see, you can recognize it in another book published in 1966 by Philip Bataille, when he analyzes, or I would rather call it, when he dissects the Arab mind. There is a book by the title, under the title, The Arab Mind, الذهن العربي لفيليب Bataille. So, and we can go on as far as the use of the superlatives. That is to say, by keeping or maintaining, sustaining the sacred mysteries of poetry, according to Sidney, somebody or someone will achieve what can be typified under the superlatives, the greatest, the most passionate, and so on and so forth. England did indeed rise up and take notice, and for in the 25 years after An Apology for Poetry, 37 new works of drama and poetry took England by storm. This can tell us how far influential Sidney's essay, An Apology for Poetry, and this can be translated into the publication, or has been translated into the publication of so many literary works. And echoes of Sidney's emotionality reverberates throughout the centuries. Reverberate, that is because it has got its own echoes. This emotionality of Sidney has been ruled out by T.S. Eliot in what we can call, in what he calls the impersonal theory of poetry. So, if we try to follow up the line of how far a critic is emotional or morally oriented, how much space has been given to emotionality as far as the thinking of and thinking for poetry, beginning with Sidney, it has been blocked, I would say, blocked or ruled out, you see, by T.S. Eliot's impersonal theory of poetry, which has been articulated in a very laconic and serious terms in his essay, Tradition and Individual Talent. Again, I draw your attention to the impersonal theory of poetry, but I would not give you any details. If you are interested, you can go and check the essay, and it's available. Not only it's available in English, but also it's available in Arabic. It has already been translated into Arabic and published in المهد, مجلة أردنية، التراث والموهبة الفردية. ناهيك عن كثير من النقاد المصريين ابتداء من فاطمة موسى وسلمان ورشاد رشدي الذين تبنوا ما يسمى بالنقد الجديد الأمريكي، عكفوا على ترجمة الكثير من نتاجات النقاد الجدد الأمريكان، وهذا المهاد يرجع بأصوله إلى T.S. Eliot والناقد الإنجليزي المعروف I.A. Richards، ابتداء من كتابه مبادئ النقد الأدبي مرورا بالنقد العملي وكيف نقرأ قصيدة وكتبه وساينسز اند بويتري والعلوم والشعر وما إلى ذلك من الكتب التي كتبها I.A. Richards. والمكان لا المكان ولا الزمان يسمح لي الخوض في تفاصيل كتابات I.A. Richards النقدية. So echoes of Sidney's emotionality reverberate throughout the centuries. Moreover, those who are adopting the ethos, I would say, of the new American criticism will definitely come across an essay, Affective Fallacy, Affective and Intentional Fallacy. Wimsen and Birdsley, ناقدان أمريكيان، نشر مقالة أشعلت النار في الهشيم تحت عنوان مغالطة التأثر ومغالطة القصدية، وبطبيعة الحال the thrust of this essay يعني ما أكدت عليه هذه المقالة المشهورة أنها سعت إلى to dehistoricize the poem يعني إخراج القصيدة من التاريخ يعني وزحزحة المؤلف عن موقعه and de-authored the poem. So de-authorization of the poem along with the dehistoricization of it are really the results of this tremendously significant essay under the title Intentional and Affective and Intentional Fallacy by Wonsit Birdsley. Throughout the centuries in English literature, especially in British Romantic writings of the early 1800s, the British Romantic writings, at the top of which you see the preface to the lyrical ballads by both William Wordsworth and Coleridge, which is labeled again as the Romantic Manifesto. يعني بداية الكتابات النقدية الرومانسية في مقدمة وورdsworth لقصائد وورdsworth وكولريدج لقصائد غنائية، وبطبيعة الحال هذا العمل ترجم إلى العربية منذ زمن بعيد، وصارت عندنا في الثقافة العربية أو في الشعر العربي ما يسمى بجماعة الديوان، ناهيك عن أن الرومانسية اختلفت باختلاف الموقع أو المكان الذي حلت فيه، فهي ذات إيهاب في إنجلترا يختلف عن إيهابها في فرنسا، وكذا الحال عن إيهابها في العالم العربي. وجماعة الديوان ما يسمى لأن هناك عندنا في الثقافة العربية مجموعة من جماعة أبول وجماعة الديوان، المازني والعقاد وما إلى ذلك من الآخرين. لا أريد الخوض في هذا التفاصيل، للمهتمين ممكن أن يرجعوا إلى كثير من الكتب، وبطبيعة الحال هناك أطروحة أعدت وكتبت في جامعة بغداد دخلت من هذا الموضوع ميدانا للبحث والاستقصاء تحت عنوان The Diwan Group. في وقت كانت جامعة بغداد تؤكد على الدراسات المقارنة. This is what we can have as far as Sydney is concerned. At the very beginning, I've referred to the idea that we are going to speak about cursorily or briefly about Johnny Dryden as being the most representative or typical representative of what came to be called the Restoration Age. And this age has got so many names: the Augustan Age, the Restoration Age, the Age of Reason, and so on and so forth. And definitely, I suppose I'm afraid I'm not wrong going to get, to make a mistake that you have already been introduced to some lines, at least, written by Johnny Dryden. I've already referred to the idea that Dryden is not only a poet, a critic, but also a very famous translator. He is famous for his translation of Virgil's works, notably the Aeneid, to which he has written a very significant introduction, and he has proffered or advanced some of his own ideas as far as the translation is concerned. There was a time in my life when I wrote on the views of Dryden, Shelley, and Eliot as far as poetic translation is concerned. And it was published ever since in آفاق عربية. سبق وأن تصديت يعني في أحد البحوث أو المقالات إلى آراء درايدن وشيلي وإليوت بخصوص ترجمة الشعر، ونشرت في آفاق عربية وقتئذ. What is of concern here is that Dryden is not only a poet but also a translator. As being, as I said, the typical representative of the Restoration. He is very much famous for an essay of a dramatic poesy. So the theorization on dramatic poetry begins seriously with the Dryden. And then this step was taken further by T.S. Eliot as far as dramatic poetry is concerned. And this does not mean that these are two only. There is an essay by W.B. Yeats on a dramatic poesy. So you have got the three figures, Dryden, Eliot, and Yeats, if you are interested. هناك كتاب في العربية كتب عن الشعر في المسرح، الشعر في المسرح أو المسرح الشعري. وبطبيعة الحال للعرب إسهامات في هذا المجال. So to have some sort of a bird's eye view of the use of poetry or poetry in a drama, as far as theory is concerned, you have to have some ideas that are articulated by Dryden in his essay. Interestingly enough, the very structure of the essay is also dramatic. If you go through it, if you read into it, you can recognize that it is structurally based on the structure of drama. It has got a dramatic structure. I don't like to talk about the structure of this essay, you see, unless you have got an idea about it. It is published again, you see, in the book that I have already referred to, English Critical Text by D.J. Enright and Ernest Shaker. Okay. John Dryden embodies the spirit and ideals of the neo-classical period. Neo-classical period يعني هو ينتمي ويمثل أفضل تمثيلا لما اصطلح عليه بالفترة فترة كلاسية جديدة. كلاسية جديدة. Going back to the past, rationalization, you see the idea of imitation, following up rules, and so on and so forth. I don't like to get into these details, that is to say, because I suppose that you have already been exposed to through your own study of poetry. And if you are not well familiar with these ideas, and you can check The Age of Reason, a book published by Penguin through the Penguin series, and what is the spirit and ideals of the new classical, the literary age that follows Sydney and the Renaissance. So the best representative, the typical representative of what came to be called the Restoration Age, the new classical age, the Augustan age, or the Age of Reason, is supposed to be Dryden. If somebody reads into Dryden's poetry, criticism, and translation, he can arrive at the basic ideals of neoclassicism and have and will have a definite idea as far as the spirit of the age. The spirit of the age. This is a German term. It's Zeitung, and it's the spirit of the age. Dr. Samuel Johnson, he is a lexicographer who authored Dictionary of the English Language, 1755, a work considered to be one of the greatest single achievements of scholars. By the way, T.S. Eliot has accused Dryden because he is of the idea that it's due to Dryden's poetry that English poetry suffers from what Eliot calls dissociation of sensibility. Dissociation of sensibility, which runs against what he has already termed the unified sensibility, brought forth by the metaphysical schools or the school of Donne. So after Donne, chronologically speaking, comes Dryden. Under the influence of Dryden's poetry, English poetry suffers. according to T.S. Eliot's, you see, judgment, dissociation of sensibility. Yet, or nevertheless, Dryden remains as a figure that we have to take account of his own ideas, mainly through his essay, an essay on a dramatic poesy, whereby we can arrive at so many ideas, critical ideas that forms a very basic period in the evolution and development of both history and a critical theory in English literature and criticism. So let us continue. The most prolific writer of the Restoration. Prolific means he produces a lot. He has got so many books. The name given to that period of English literature from 1660 to 1700. With the coming of 1660, you see, it's called the Restoration. King Charles II, who used to be in France, has been brought back, you see, to English throne, and the period, the historical period, was named by historians as the Restoration period. Before it, there was no king in England, and that's why it's labeled as the interregnum. Interregnum, that's to say there is no king at the time and the queen. And what we recognize here, as far as the period is concerned, is the politicization of literature, okay, the institutionalization of the political parties, تأسيس الأحزاب وعقلنة أو تأسيس الأدب وعقلنة الدين, rationalization of religion. These are basic trends in the Restoration period that we have to take into account. And there is the French influence. وهناك ما يصطلح عليه بالتأثير الفرنسي في إنجلترا. Even the word etiquette is of a French origin. I don't like to elaborate as far as the Restoration period is concerned. What our main concern is what are the ideas that are advocated by Dryden in his an essay on dramatic poesy. Without having a background, you cannot understand what's going on. علينا أن نتعلم درسا بليغا حين نتصدى لأية نظرية. علينا ألا نعزلها عن سياقها السوسيو-ثقافي بالإضافة إلى جذورها الفلسفية. So we have to adopt this as a tool of research. علينا أن نتبنى هذه الأداة المعرفية وأن نتصدى لنظرية. علينا ألا نعزلها عن سياقها السوسيو-ثقافي. تأثيراتها من أين وردت وما هي الينابيع التي امتاحت منها. يعني لا يمكن للمنظر أن يكون منظرا حصيفا يعتد به ما لم يعني تكن له مرجعيات معروفة. مهما حاول تغييبها فيمكن العثور على شذرات منها خطوطها العريضة في الأقل، وهذا يساعدنا على فهم النظرية وعلى فهم النظرية وفاعليتها and so on, viability and so on and so forth. فإذا واحدة من الأدوات التي عليك أن تتبناها كأداة في البحث هو أن تعمل جاهدا على وضع النظرية في سياقها السوسيو-ثقافي، بعدها الاجتماعي وبعدها الثقافي، لأنها هذه النظرية هي نتاج للثقافة المحيطة والمهيمنة. فإذا لا يمكن لنا أو لا يمكن لك أن تستوعب ما تنطوي عليه مقالة درايدن في الشعر المسرحي دون أن تلوم ولو بشكل سريع وموجز المامة سريعة بطبيعة الثقافة في عصر عودة الملكية. ما الذي فضلوه؟ ما هي الأولويات؟ وما هي المؤثرات؟ وتحديدا المؤثرات السوسيو الاجتماعية والثقافية. The structure of Dryden's the first serious literary, you see, and T.S. Eliot, the great 20th century poet and essayist. asserts that Dryden wrote the first serious literary criticism in English. By the way, T.S. Eliot is quite ambivalent in his attitude towards Dryden. In terms of Dryden's criticism, his essay on a dramatic poesy is the first serious attempt on Dryden's part. But when you read T.S. Eliot's essay on metaphysical poets, you can recognize how far critical T.S. Eliot is of Dryden. And I've already referred to the idea that he accuses him of being the harbinger of dissociation of sensibility in English poetry. A disease, he says, or he goes further, that English poetry never recovers from. For those who are familiar with both Dryden and T.S. Eliot, can have a panoramic picture of what a criticism is supposed to be as far. You see, and there is this linking line between Dryden on one hand and T.S. Eliot on the other. The first serious literary criticism in English, this is a value judgment. He's very assertive and evaluative, T.S. Eliot, an English by an English poet. Dryden's last contribution to literary criticism, an essay of a dramatic poesy, highlights his genius. So Dryden's genius lies in his essay. I don't like to elaborate on what makes a genius into a genius. Do we have geniuses? What are those innate abilities that nominate someone to be a genius? What are the linking lines or the demarcating lines between genius and madness, genius and rationality, and so on and so forth? Do we have geniuses, by the way? Anyhow, so this value judgment that has been made by the author in labeling Dryden as a genius. T.S. Eliot, you see, never calls Dryden as a genius. He speaks about his own work as being the first serious contribution to literary criticism. Anyhow, values are quite relative. We should not be going to the extremes by lavishing unconditional praise on people, whether they are of the past or people of the future or people of the present, because the future is unpredictable. The structure of Dryden's essay, quite often we come across the value-laden term structure. What's structure? What makes a structure into a structure? What differences are there between form, shape, construction, and structure? Check these. Check these. Although you deal with surface and deep structure in terms of the Chomskyan framework, in economics we have deep and surface structure. Deep and surface structure. In Chomsky we have got infrastructure and surface structure ما يسمى البناء التحتي والبناء الفوقي. So in order to arrive at a full understanding of these two terms, we have to question or to call the term structure into question to see what ramifications it carries, what implications it has, and so on and so forth. We should not avoid these, however familiar they are, because they are intricate. If not intriguing. They are intricate, but they are intriguing quite often. The structure of Dryden's essay, an essay of it dramatizes Dryden's keen literary talent. So as I referred to this idea some time earlier, that the very structure of Dryden's essay is dramatic. And I don't like to speak about the dramatic structure. And Freiberg's curve, ideas that I assume you have already been exposed to in your study of drama. Okay. During a naval battle between English and the Dutch, 4 men are floating over the barge on the Thames River. You see, the essay starts with a round table discussion among 4 people, and the topic of their discussion is European drama. European drama. There are so many details on Lope de Vega, the famous Spanish dramatist. And they exchange ideas. And there is a statement where one of the speakers says that he is against Ben Jonson's plays because he has Romanized our tongue. Romanized our tongue. On the other hand, we come across another statement as far as the British drama. It is woven, this is Dryden's, woven on English looms. إن المسرحيات الإنجليزية قد نسجت على أنوال إنجليزية. وعليك أن تعرف العلاقة ما بين النول والنسيج. نولي والنسيج. وإذا لم تعرف هذا في العربية فاسأل من هما أكبر منك عمرا أو تفحصها في قاموس عربي في وقت تراجعت فيه العربية ووصلت إلى الدرك الأسفل من هذا. So, you see, Dryden is so talented in such a way that the very structure of his essay is of a dramatic predilection. يعني ذا نزوع درامي or of a dramatic penchant. من نزوع درامي, penchant, predilection, tendency, and so on and so forth. Check these words. Unless you have got a wide range of vocabulary as far as criticism is concerned, you may not get an easy access, or you could not find your way easily or smoothly into what you are reading. This is the time for you to look up any word that you have got no idea about its own lexical or dictionary meaning. Thereby, through reading, you will develop your own vocabulary. A naval battle between the English and the Dutch. 4 men are floating over a barge in the Thames River. And significantly, this, the round table discussion is the very way or method that Plato follows up when he discusses all the ramifications and types of love in his dialogue, the Symposium. أفلاطون اتبع نفس الطريقة في طرح أفكاره على لسان سقراط ودايوتيما حول موضوعة الحب في حواريته الأثيرة عن الحب تحت عنوان المأدبة. أما الاستهلال الحديث أو في بداية نهر التايمز البريطاني فهذا يذكرنا طبعا بالرواية القصيرة لجوزيف كونراد Heart of Darkness, قلب الظلام، حين يبدأ مارلو الشخصية الأساس في حديثه إلى مجموعة من البحارة عن شخصية كيرتس وما الذي فعله كيرتس في وصفه النموذج الأثير للاستعمار في الكونغو. فالآن يمكن لك أن تتابع هذه الخطوط. طريقة طرح الموضوعات عبر الدائرة المستديرة في مأدبة أفلاطون، وتعرج على درويدن في مقالته عن المسرح أو عن الشعر المسرحي، وهذا الاستهلال في بداية نهر التايمز البريطاني نراه عند درويدن وفي مستهل الرواية القصيرة لكونراد من أجل المتعة ومن أجل تنمية وتربية وتعزيز عادة عليك أن تؤسس لها وتربيها، ألا وهي كيف لك أن تؤسس علاقات بين الأشياء. How to set up relations among things. وهذا هو ديدن الذهن البشري الحصيف. علينا أن نتعلم كيف نؤسس لا يستطيع لا الحاسبة وغير الحاسبة أن تؤسس علاقة. وهذا هو النعمة الإلهية التي أغدقها الله علينا، أن منحنا ذهنا يقظا أن ديدنه إذا كان حصيفا أن يؤسس علاقات ما بين الأشياء. We should avoid learning through the bricklaying business. Rather, we should develop the habit of setting up relations to create connections among things. Right. The Platonic and the Aristotelian debate concerning the nature or inherent condition of art as the imitation of nature. Again, the idea of imitation. This is a focal point, not only as we've seen in Plato, Aristotle, Horace, Sidney. Likewise, it's also available in Dryden. The term of mimesis. And through mimesis, we come across representation. ما يسمى بالتمثيل أو التمثل. هل التمثيل هو التمثل؟ And so on and so forth. والتمثيل, representation is a very significant term. يعني والتمثيل مفهوم على درجة عالية من التعقيد حتى في الفلسفة الفرنسية. يعني إذا ما رجعت إلى كتاب فوكو The Order of Discourse نظام الخطاب تكتشف أن الفصل الأول منه يندرج تحت عنوان التمثيل، يشرح يفكك في لوحة واحدة على امتداد أكثر من 29 صفحة للفنان الإسباني فالسكواس. ريد حاولوا أن تقرأوا كي تحافظوا على إنسانيتكم. The Platonic and Aristotle debate concerning the nature or inherent condition of art as an imitation of nature itself begins the discussion. What is the Drydean position on imitation? Definitely, Dryden has not started out of the blue or from scratch. He has got a very solid background to work against, beginning with Plato, Aristotle, and so on and so forth, which we have sketchily elaborated upon throughout our previous, meetings. Nature, argues one debate, must be imitated directly. So there is, among the debaters on this roundtable discussion, of direct imitation, المحاكاة المباشرة، يعني نقل الواقع حرفيا كالمرآة. نقل الواقع حرفيا كالمرآة. Whereas another declares that writers should imitate the classical authors. في حين الطرف الآخر يرى أن المحاكاة لابد أن تكون محاكاة للأقدمين لا للطبيعة. لأن المرآة أداة سلبية تعكس ما يسقط عليها، لا يمكن أن تحدث أي تغيير. التغييرات حين تحدث حين تتغير طبيعة المرآة، أما أن تكون مقعرة أو محدبة، هذه بديهيات. مقعرة والمحدبة والمرآة لعبت دور كبير جدا في مسيرة الفكر البشري، ابتداء من أسطورة الكهف عند أفلاطون، مرورا بالمرآة في نظرية الانعكاس الماركسية إلى المرحلة المرآتية جاك لاكان عالم النفس الفرنسي، والمرآة المكعبة وما يعني التي دخلت مع الفن التكعيبي، الفن التكعيبي اللي أفاد منه بيكاسو وما إلى ذلك من الأمور، ولا إرادة الخوض في تفاصيل المرآة وما الذي دعبته في الفكر البشري، ناهيك عن أن هناك كتابا مشهورا بعنوان The Mirror and the Lamp، المرآة والمصباح للناقد الأمريكي المعروف A.M. Abrams has written a book under the title The Mirror and the Lamp, with the help of which you can recognize the differences, the comparisons and the contrast between the Romantic and the Restoration theories of poetry. Anyhow, as Homer, because such ancient writers were the best imitators of nature. So classical authors have written their works on the basis of imitating nature. When we come and imitate those authors, we are, you see, imitators in one sense that has been elaborated upon by Dryden in the discussion. هناك ما يسمى بالمحاكاة المباشرة للطبيعة، وهناك كتاب عظماء بلغوا شأوا في النتاج الأدبي، وجاء آخرون أو متأخرين وقلدوهم. فبالتالي هؤلاء الأدباء المقلدين المحاكين هم محاكون لأنهم حاكوا أدباء سبق لهم أن حاكوا الطبيعة، حاكوا الطبيعة. ويأتي في المقدمة منهم هوميروس في الأوديسة أو في الإلياذة. Because such ancient writers were the best imitators of nature. Through the voice of Neander, Dryden presents the benefits of both positions. One of the speakers in the round table discussion on the ship that is sailing in the Thames, you see, there are 2 points. One is closely related to the direct imitation of nature, and the second one is closely related, you see, to the imitation of imitation, that is to say, an imitator of the classical authors. And these points have got their own benefits that are articulated by a figure by the name of Neander in the essay of Dryden. Now the lines are getting clearer for those who are keenly and attentively following the line of argument. A lengthy discussion then ensues over the Aristotelian concept of the 3 unities. In your study of a drama in the second year, I suppose again that you have been introduced to the Aristotelian concept of what makes a tragedy into a tragedy, what are the basic unities, what is the characteristics or qualifications of the tragic hero, what is the tragic flaw or Hermetia, what are the basic pillars or parts of a tragedy, and so on and so forth. Among those items in the very constitution of a tragedy comes the 3 unities. Idea that has been advocated by Aristotle in his Poetics as far as the tragedy is concerned. And again, likewise, it's taken up by the roundtable discussion in Dryden's essay, an essay of a dramatic poesy. So this is a point of contention. يعني هذه نقطة جديرة بالنقاش أو مثار نقاش. It is a very contentious area of debate, a contentious area of debate that you have to be very much careful about. And these are 3 basic categories, you see, unity of time, place, and action within a drama. Should the plot of a drama take place during one 24-hour cycle time in one location and place? Should it be the only single plot with no subplots? The position that a drama must keep the 3 unities unquestionably wins the debate. So through the debate of the round table discussion, you see, the conclusion arrived at is that the play that carries the 3 unities will win over. So the 2 major ideas that have been discussed is the idea of imitation, mimesis, a major term in Aristotle, and a linking line among various critics across the period, across history, up to the time of Dryden. And the other idea is the Aristotelian unities. But this does not, you see, mean that the essay does not carry some other ideas or does not show some other concerns. And this is what we are going to go through as far as the further concerns that are within the essay. The language of diction of a play, with the concluding emphasis being placed on the proper speech. The emphasis on the proper speech. This is what's usually called decorum. If you are familiar with the restoration period of poetry, you are supposed to be familiar with what is called poetic diction and decorum. Call a spade a spade. Okay? And the poetic diction could be found in the example instead of calling a fish, they call it the finny prey. The finny prey, يعني الضحية ذات الزعانف. Issues of decorum, that is whether violent acts should appear on the stage with the final speaker declaring it would be quite improper. And if somebody tries to stage a play in the auditorium, should he show scenes of violence or not? والسؤال الآن هل هاملت قتل بولونيوس أمام الناس أو خلف الستار؟ ماذا يشترط أو يطلب من المخرج في مسرحية في عصر النهضة في عصر درايدن، عصر عودة الملكية في عصر درايدن؟ هل يراد منه يعني عرض مشاهد العنف والدماء أمام النظارة أم يخفيها؟ ما هو الأنسب؟ ما الذي تقتضيه الأخلاق الأدبية أو الفنية؟ ما الذي عليه أن يراعي في هذا الصدد أو هذا الموقف؟ So decorum is highly significant in this particular instance. The difference between the English and the French theaters, with the English drama writing winning out for its diversity. يعني درايدن أو المتحدثين في هذه round table discussion, you see, as I said, working out a contrast or a contrast between the English and the French drama. You see, English drama wins over, simply because according to mine they are woven on English looms. ذلك لأن المسرحيات الإنجليزية قد نسجت على أنوال إنجليزية. The value of rhymed as opposed to blank verse in a drama, with rhymed verse the victor. يعني هل يفضل كتابة المسرحيات بالشعر المرسل أم الشعر المقفى؟ والنتيجة كانت لصالح الشعر المقفى. Although Dryden later recanted this position, although he has recanted, يعني تنصل عن هذا الموقف, if you do not have an idea as far as recantation is concerned, and wrote many of his tragedies in a blank verse. المعروف عن درايدن أعاد كتابة يعني مسرحية أنتوني عن كليوباترا بما يتوافق والذوق في عودة الملكية. عودة الملكية. فإذا هناك خطان متوازيان. هناك من أساءوا لشكسبير بإعادة الكتابة, and this is what is called Baudelarization of Shakespeare. وهناك من أعادوا كتابة شكسبير تماشيا مع ذائقة العصر وهموم الجمهور أو الغاية من التي يصبو إلى تحقيقها المؤلف المسرحي. كوريولانوس أعاد كتابتها برخت الألماني. يوسف الصايغ أعاد كتابة عطيل عندنا في العراق، وما إلى ذلك من عمليات إعادة الكتابة. سامي عبد الحميد المرحوم سامي عبد الحميد قدم لنا هاملت عربيا. الملك لير صلاح القصب قدمها في العراق بطريقة تختلف، وما زال يحدوه الأمل في تقديم مسرحية ريتشارد الثالث، لكن دائما يفاجئ أنه لا يوجد هناك تمويل. The value of rhymed as opposed to blank verse in the drama, with rhymed verse the victor, although Dryden later as okay. Dryden sides with politesse, then courteous formality, clarity, order, decorum, elegance, clearness, and wit as the controlling characteristics of literary works. These are the basic aspects of literature that has been aimed at in the Restoration Age. Clarity, conciseness, preciseness, decorum, propriety, and so on and so forth. Right. So by and large, Dryden's contribution to literary criticism is immense. First, he develops the study of literature in and of itself. هذه مسألة مهمة، أنه عمل على تطوير دراسة الأدب لغاية للأدب نفسه in and of itself، لا لأغراض أخرى. In and of itself. That is to say, one should dedicate his efforts or her efforts exclusively to studying literature as literature rather than something else. يعني التركيز الدراسة على الأدب بوصفه أدبا لا لتحقيق غايات أخرى أو لأغراض أخرى. So this spark comes from Dryden when he calls for devoting the study of literature to literature. يعني دراسة الأدب من أجل الأدب لا لأغراض أخرى in and of itself. Not obsessing over its moral and theological worth. That's so quite often we come across people who study literature for trying to eliciting or extracting some moral values or theological أو أبعاد اللاهوتية وما إلى ذلك. He creates a natural, simple prose style that still guides and affects modern criticism. This is the method of writing. He calls for the use of simple prose style. بطبيعة الحال هناك جانب من التعقيد في كلمة simple. simple بسيط بالعربية، أن تكتب بأسلوب بسيط، لكن simple في بعدها الثقافي في الإنجليزية عليك أن تقف وتتحرى هل أن المفردات المستخدمة أتت من أصول يونانية أم لاتينية. So this is the intricacy, the complexity of being simple. هناك فرق في المهاد الثقافي يقودك للتفريق أو للوقوف على الفرق ما بين بسيط وما إلى ذلك. لكن علينا أن نفرق ما بين البسيط والتبسيط. يعني there is a difference between simple and simplistic. Style guides and affects modern criticism and writing in general. لا زال ديدن النقاد هو أن يكتبوا بأسلوب بسيط. But this cannot be generalized. أن تقرأ مقالة كتبها فيلسوف فرنسي مثل داريدا أو فوكو، من أين تأتي البساطة؟ Right. لكن يبقى السؤال، هل أن فوكو أو داريدا نقاد أدب أم فلاسفة قدموا إضاءات إلى النقد الأدبي؟ By making use of a variety of critical perspectives. استخدام وجهات نظر أو زوايا نظر متعددة. That is to say, Dryden ever since his own time is after what is called diversity in opinion. It's not unanimity or uniformity. يعني التعدد في وجهات النظر. We should not be monist أحاديين. Should not be monist. We should be pluralist. والتعددية نقف عليها في دستور العراق لعام 2005 بلد تعددي. اوكي، دينه الإسلام. وهذا يصدق على العراق لأنه نحن متعددي القوميات ابتداء من اوكي متعددي القوميات والأعراق. From Greek to French, Dryden brings all of these critical perspectives, best insights into the still infant discipline of English literary criticism. He has made use of different perspectives that have been advocated, articulated, be they of a French origin or Spanish origin and so on and so forth. But this doesn't necessarily mean or vindicate the assumption that he is eclectic. He is eclectic, as is the case with Sidney. He is highly diversified. He is pluralistically oriented. Dryden advocates for the establishment of objective principles of criticism. According to him, principles should be very objective, an idea that will be taken up not only by Dryden, by Matthew Arnold, but by T.S. Eliot. Criticism should be very objective to the total exclusions of rash thinking, pranks, and prejudices, and critical vagaries, and so on and so forth. Okay? According to Arnold, criticism should be fully disinterested. That is to say, it has no biases, nor should it be carrying, prejudices. Right. Well, it's simultaneously moving the emphasis of away from the construction of a work and to the modern emphasis on how readers and critics appreciate text. So he has sustained or maintained a very subtle balance. Although he is emphasizing on the constitution of the literary work, that is to say, the literary work as a form, but he does not sideline, marginalized, or excluded the role of the reader. And the reader is a very important element in the process of understanding poetry. There will be schools in the development of literary criticism whose chief objective and aim is to boost up the position and role of the reader. That's enough for